This is a challenge lesson to take what we've learned in the earlier lessons and apply it. So the objective of this challenge is to have some images on your page and make these images clickable, adding event listeners, and then also popping up, so getting the image source attribute and then showing that on the large screen. In order to do that, you can do a window open using the source and then the image name, and then you can set these parameters for the pop-up window that's going to open up. So you can pause the video, try this out, and I'll walk you through the solution coming up. I've added 3 images into our index.html, and you can see there's 3 different images. They all have a source value, so that's the attribute that we're going to use in order to select and create our pop-up window. So the first thing we need to do is select all of the images on the page. We've got 3 of them being displayed there. Let's set up a variable in order to hold that object information. We can call it image list. And then using the document object, using query selector, let's select all of the images from the page, and we can refresh and then type in image list just to make sure that we've got our node list of elements there. Next, we need to loop through that list. So using a for loop, setting I to 0, we're going to loop through while I is less than image list length, and then increment I by 1. And this is where we're going to add the event listener on the inside here. So as we loop through each one of the elements with an index value of I, we're going to add an event listener on that element. So adding event listener, and the event that we're listening for is a click. And when it gets clicked, so we can create an anonymous function, or we can just create a function name, or we can just use the anonymous one. And in this case, there's not a whole bunch of information that we need to do. We can select the current element. So whenever it gets clicked, you can see we get the image options there and the image values there. So you can use source, and that will give you the path to where the source, because this is just a regular object, and it'll give you the path to where the image is located. And you can use that within the window open method in order to create the pop-up. So using this source as the path, and then specifying my image, that's just a name for it. And then there's a bunch of parameters that you can add in here. So resizable equals yes. And let's just set a width for that. So 500. And these should be equal signs actually. And these are just regular parameters for the pop-up window. And now we can try to make this big. So now when I click up the image, it opens up a new window with the image content. And it opens up the image on full size using the path that's contained within the images themselves. There's also another example within the event listeners that you might have seen when we are looking at the different event listeners. So you can also do the on click. So this is going to do the same thing, where this is directly applying the event listener to the element. And we don't use these by default because it doesn't work across all of the different browsers. Some of the older browsers might not take on click, as well as you can't as easily remove out this type of event listener as you can with when you add the event listener. So that's what the difference is. And at the end of the day, it is the same thing. The functionality is the same, but most of the time I do prefer using the add event listener. And I'll show you that they do work the same way. So even if we were to comment this one out, so just do a block comment. Instead of add the event listener, we can do the on click, set that up, and it's expecting a function on the other side. So it'll work the same way, where it's got the function, but we don't need that other wrapping line. And when we refresh it, the results are the same thing. It's going to work the same way. And there are, of course, some disadvantages here as well. So the add event listener is a much more flexible method of doing it, but you will see developers using the on click as well. And for each one of these, and as we saw within the element, there's all these different event listeners. So there's on click, on mouse, and a whole bunch of different ones that we saw within the document directory.